Good afternoon. Welcome back. Everybody hear me? Everybody have a good lunch? Everybody enjoy the morning so far?
All this happening, and I said, it's because of you. It's because of all those folks back there at that table. It's about volunteer leadership, about people giving their lives to follow Jesus this way. And I feel that's what we're all called to do, is find the thing where we can be diverse and united behind a common vision. And that is what happens at Living Waters for the World, and what I believe Jesus is calling us all to. That's why I'm so excited to hear from Bruce. Bruce, when he was moderator, began really lifting up our work, and ever since he's been faithful in doing that. That's the kind of guy that he is. Before I go, I'm supposed to tell you two things, and I'm going to show you a quick video. We would love for you to become a cupbearer. A cupbearer is a monthly giver to Living Waters for the World. I want you to know there's a little thing called a QR code on there. That makes it really, really easy. And watch it, wait for it. Skip Dunford just did it with his phone. He's holding up his cupbearer mug right now. This is what you get if you become a cupbearer. Isn't that exciting? Yes. So thank you so much for everything you've done for us as we continue to venture out into the world and continue to see more clean water flow. We are proud to be a Matthew 25 organization. I'm grateful that Bill is here, who of course helps lead the Matthew 25 effort for our denomination. And we really believe that Matthew 25 is not just about the feeding. It's not just about the offering the drink. It's not just about the clothing. It's about those transactions to see one another, to be brothers and sisters together. So let's not focus on the transactional. Let's focus on the relational aspect of Matthew 25. And so we made a new video just for that reason. It premiered during Advent, and I'd like to show it to you now. Thank you for letting me speak to you just for a little bit. Goodbye.
Child prays for peace on earth, and she's calling out from the sea of hurt. Oh come, Emmanuel. And can you hear the angels singing? Breaks with the tears of a mother. The baby's cry is the sound of love. Come down, Emmanuel. Oh, here's the song for the suffering. He is Messiah, the Prince of Peace has come. He has come. Emmanuel.
Chat about you for a second. I'm not going to do a lot. We do have books available. Everybody that registered should have gotten a book, In Defense of Kindness. We'll have extras if you'd like to, if you're going to be so overwhelmed by what Bruce is about to say, that you think, man, our whole church needs to hear this, and you want to take the book back. We have some for sale out there. You can buy some and take some with you. It would really help us not having to haul them back wherever we're going. It really is good to have Bruce. Bruce, how long have I known you, man? I know you ran 13 years ago. We're all familiar, but Bruce and I, when did you start joining church? Was it 99?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Right.
So I started at church back in 99, as did Bruce, and so that's when I kind of came across him. One of my first, I think, visits as a national staff person was out to San Francisco.
That's right. Yeah, you had just left Dallas.
I came to kiss the ring. Jenny came to kiss the ring. And I came out to his chartering, and so we've had a long distance relationship for. That sounds kind of creepy.
Don't tweet that out. Don't tweet that out.
No, I won't tweet that out. We're good. But Bruce has been, influential in a lot of different areas in the work of New Church and evangelism. He's been a voice for a long, long time, and now that voice is getting bigger and broader and beyond New Churches, and we're just excited for him to be here. I'll let him introduce and tell all about himself, but please welcome Bruce Reyes Chow. Please, do we have to stand for you?
I love it. This had Bruce just talking about himself. Yes, that's what I need, is more time to talk about myself. It is good to be with you. I got to spend a little bit of time with some of you this morning during the workshop, so apologies for a little bit of the similar intro. But this is my very first trip to do anything like this in over 2 years, like many people, and lots of Zoom conferences. I've probably been with some of you at events over the last couple of years, which have been really an amazing experience to be able to do. I'm probably in a different state once or twice every week talking about the book. If you take at least 10 books home and you have a book group in your church, just send me an email and I'll Zoom in for an hour for your book group. And especially towards the end when folks have questions or they don't like something and they want to have a word with me, feel free to let them do that. I really, please take me up on it. That's one of the things that we have done with the publisher, is that if a church community buys 10, I'll come in for an hour. You're all bought enough where I just came to this kind of thing. So, and if you want to have that, I'm willing to come Zoom in with you. So let me talk a little bit about what we're going to do today, and then do a little bit of introduction of a little bit of me, and then we'll jump into the book a little bit. We're going to do some small group time, some feedback, and engage with one another. But again, it's my first time here. I want to give you a little bit of a warning that if I look at you and it looks like I don't know who you are, even though I know you really well, it's because I walked out of the hot hotel. So if you're like, he knows me, that's so rude. I'm like, I actually can't see you. That's what's going on. All right, so we're going to go through a little bit of the book. If you haven't read the book, that's fine. But we're going to talk about kindness today, and a little bit of some of what I've been thinking about and written about, and want to get your feedback, as well as have you all have some conversation amongst yourselves to talk about kindness today. Hopefully to flip the idea a little bit on its head. Like most of us, there's nothing really ever new that any of us writes, but I hope that to give this to in a way that does manifest a little bit different thinking about kindness. There is what I've seen in the last, I would say, year, this kindness industrial complex that has grown up. There's kindness shirts and kindness hats and kindness pins, and like it has become a transactional kind of thing. And while I'm not wearing kindness on you somehow, I do think that what we can do is dive a little deeper. And so will hopefully help us do that. The best review I ever had was a colleague who said, tweeted out, "I don't want to read your book because it may make me behave differently." And I'm like, I'm going to take that because yes, it will. And so really was engaged in I helped with creating games and doing all that, but what did it feel like and use? So that's not a surprise. This is me. I was going to be a lawyer. That was my first calling, was to be an attorney. This is me interning in high school at a law firm. I was in LexisNexis at the time, if some of you law people know that. Probably the last time that I wore a tie consecutive days ever. So I am clearly Presbyterian. I know some people may not believe that is true, but I am. I love being Presbyterian. This is my grandfather on the right there, is Esteban de los Reyes. He was a founding elder of Trinity Presbyterian Church in Stockton, California. Trinity Presbyterian was founded out of Filipino farm workers in the Central Valley. They chose to not put Filipino in its name because they knew at some level that part of the city was going to transition with immigration and whatever, and that is what has happened. Trinity Presbyterian Church over the years is a small congregation, is always struggling, but I would bank that it's one of the most diverse congregations that we have in our denomination. Again, small, struggling, trying to figure out who it's going to be, like many congregations. But my grandfather, New organizing, outreach mentality, I grew up in that. It was a progressive church before I knew what a progressive church was. I didn't know that I was at a progressive church until I went somewhere else and like, oh, you're at a progressive church. I'm like, okay, whatever you need to call it, that's fine. So that Trinity Presbyterian Church is my home church. I'm ultimately just a pastor who happens to do other things. I feel called to the ministry, and that just takes place. Those people that does not hold back at all in any meeting makes me very uncomfortable often, because I've told my mom, like, Mom, I'm not sure I'd like you if you weren't my mother sometimes. It's like, I say it how it is. I'm like, I know, and that's really uncomfortable for your son. But my mother went to seminary after I did. So I graduated from SFTS in '95, the spring of Jerry. The Alumni Association will be meeting at table 10. So I graduated in '95, and then my mother started that fall and went to seminary. So my joke is always, I'm a pastor's kid with all of the glory and none of the baggage. So that's my mom. My mom just retired, and is one of those some of you are like this. She retired and then immediately started working full-time as an interim, which I don't understand. But so I think she's retiring a second time this summer. That's what she's threatening, but we'll see. As Phil mentioned, church planter is the primary thing that I did. I pastored a church right out of seminary, and then helped to plant a church in San Francisco. We are the Unicorn Church, young, multi-ethnic, Presbyterian, unapologetically Presbyterian, growing. This is our community where we ended up worshiping. They're now on their third pastor after me, and worshiping in a congregation in another part of the city. But so church planting, progressive, social justice-based church planting has always been in my blood. This building itself is silver. I don't know if you can kind of tell that because the owners of the building loved Andy Warhol. So they painted the entire thing silver, and we're like, cool, we'll just keep it that way. So that's what we did. I currently am the pastor at First Presbyterian Church of Palo Alto. This is the congregation on the day that I think they voted me in. It is the church where Robert McAfee Brown was, if some of you know Robert McAfee Brown. I joked this morning that I hear a lot about Robert McAfee Brown all the time. Let's bring back the Robert McAfee Brown lectures. Let's do this and this. You know, it's easier when the person they talk about is a jerk. But apparently Robert McAfee Brown was the sweetest person, the most wonderful human being ever. And so whenever they bring him up, I'm like, oh, Robert. And I never met him, right? Now I'm in the Robert McAfee Brown place. But it's a congregation that is deeply, deeply committed to social justice and faith. It has it in its DNA. It's been a sanctuary church around the Vietnam War. It has been a sanctuary church around asylum seekers from Central America, unapologetically LGBTQIA affirming. Did a marriage there years before we were allowed to really do that. Still trying to engage and figure out what is the next step. It's an older white congregation, like many churches. No scandal, no major kinds of things, but just declined over time, and now trying to figure out how to tell its story. I'm there as a designated pastor, so I'm 3 years into a 4-year designated, for those of you that know what that means. It means we're leasing each other, and then at the end of that we decide, I do not use the marriage metaphor. I've done a new mission statement and trying to figure out what is next. So I'm also part-time. So I'm a part-time head of staff there, which is unique and interesting. It's wonderful and terrible at the same time. So, let's go. Okay. Pretty comfortable social media. Somebody was just joking over here about being a moderator that used technology before anybody used it before, and it's just true. I remember getting accused of cheating during the moderatorial time because I had a blog, and that was unfair connections with the commissioners, is that I had a blog. Now look how far we've come now, right? I mean, I've been very comfortable in this medium for a long time. Somebody reminded me over a decade ago, there were a group of us running worship on Sunday on Twitter every Sunday night. I don't know why we did this. We were all pastoring, and somehow we decided, let's do another service together on Twitter. So that went on for a couple of years. Have been doing online worship for a while. That's not why they called me at First Presbyterian Church, but it just so happened that we were able to kind of move into that pretty well. And so it's been really exciting to watch people struggle. No, it's not exciting to watch people struggle. It's been exciting to watch us as a community try to figure out how to use this technology and not see it as inherently evil, but to try to figure out how to use it well. And I've really appreciated a lot of those conversations. This is just from worship, where I usually lead worship from. I'm a parent, I have 3 kids. Bonus points if you know what picture this is from. Okay, there's nobody cool in the room, clearly. Really? Text your kids or your grandkids. Okay. Anyway, so my kids, I love the Jonas Brothers. So if you look up Jonas Brothers pictures, they did a whole album copying the Jonas Brothers major photos that they did. This is one of them. They got liked by the Jonas Brothers on this one, which was pretty cool. And now we're empty nesters. We're very exciting. This is the first night of our empty nesting. We were, and I think we had like party music playing. This is from Snap. We had party music playing, like Mom and Dad are out clubbing. And then I found out that right after that, maybe, there we go. Right after that, I got COVID. So as some of you know, that right after I got COVID, like so many of you have been trying to move through this COVID stuff that is going on with us, trying to lead a congregation through all this, the pivoting and the ups and downs of COVID life. It is exhausting. I don't complain about any judicatories or people that are trying to lead communities through COVID decisions. I just don't, because trying to do that, I cannot imagine. I don't care what your politics are, trying to do that, it's just terrible and exhausting. I lost my grandmother to COVID in December of 20. It's terrible. If any of you have had to go through that, where you say goodbye to a loved one through an iPad, it's the worst of what you've been hearing about. And then I got it. I got that picture of our empty nester. The next day, my symptoms showed up. And we were in Arizona, so we're just going to blame Arizona, but though we don't actually know where I got it. But I was in the hospital for a little less than 2 weeks. Was not on a ventilator, but was on oxygen the whole time. I had oxygen at home for 2 months. Had to be prone, sleeping on your stomach, which is awful if any of you have been forced to do that, but it's the only way I could breathe for 3 or 4 days. And and don't know what the ramifications are. I think for the most part I'm pretty well back, but still have some long COVID heart stuff that we're watching. And so I know that this is going over and over again, and we're tired of it. But yet this is our new, whatever the new normal is, it is just an ongoing, I think, challenge and calling for us to continue to adapt. And that we need to see it as a way to do that. And I think I'll talk a little bit about kindness and the way that will help us move through that a little bit more. And again, this is my first time being out with you all, with folks, so pardon. I left my remote at home. I left all this stuff. I don't know what I'm doing. And then I took a bathroom selfie to show my kids that I was wearing sweats and a flannel, which my children were mortified that I would wear those two things together. I consider my job still, when they're in college, to send them a snap every day that mortifies them. I think that is just what it is. I didn't know actually how many people were going to be here, so we were going to do introductions. We're not going to do that because there are too many of you here. So I'm going to skip that. Here's what we're going to do today, though. Exactly. I think, my phone keeps, okay. We're going to take you first through, I'm going to define kindness for us, help us think through what that means and what it doesn't mean. And then we'll look through individual, what it means to be kind to ourselves, because I think that is one of the things that we don't do very often, or we feel guilty about. And then we'll kind of circle out to kindness in the people right around us. And then we'll look at kindness and the world and the common good, and we'll look at a little bit of what that means. Then we'll take some breaks in between, do some discussion, so it won't just be me talking the whole time. All these slides, I will upload them, this morning's workshop slides as well as these. I always post them. Some of you saw this clip live. Did any of you see this actually live? Did you really? Yeah, okay. I have so many good jokes in my head, Jerry. I don't want to. So this is Lucille Ball, the Lucille Ball show, if you have not seen it, and they're at the chocolate conveyor line. Anyway, that's what it's going to be like today. So you can decide to try and take notes or not. All these slides will be uploaded for you. You can find me on the socials at Reyes Chow. I totally engage in all those. If you send me an email, I may get back to you. I'm really terrible on email. It's a solidarity choice I make with the next generation of people and my children, is that they never answer email, and I want to be in solidarity with my kids, so I don't answer email. That is not really why. I'm just not very good at email. All right, so I used this passage out of Colossians. So Paul writes this letter to the church, and it's to a church that is going off track, and we need to be reminded of things. And so this is the passage from Colossians 3:12-15. Therefore, as God's choice, holy, and love, put on compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Be tolerant with each other. Sorry. Technology. Previous slide. Okay. Now see, now you're just messing with me. There we go. Be tolerant with each other, and if someone has a complaint against anyone, forgive each other, as the Holy One forgave you, so also forgive each other. And over all these things put on love, which is the perfect bond of unity. The peace of Christ must control your hearts, a peace into which you were called in one body, and be thankful people. I choose that passage because it's about living into our calling. So it's not just go out and do good things. It's about being called to be part of the church, called into service, called into being this part of the body of Christ, and that there are responsibilities to that. There are ways that we do that we need to really begin to think about. And one of those for me is looking at kindness. And so that's what we're gonna start with that today. I want you to do an exercise though first. It's just to close your eyes. Actually, close your eyes. And take a moment to take a deep breath in and out. And I'm just going to say a word, and I want you to just think of whatever comes to the first thing in your mind. Kindness. All right. Who knows what you thought, right? I mean, did you think of a habit? Did you think of some kind of tactic? Did you think of an event, a person, an aspiration? Let's just popcorn a couple of things. Just go ahead and yell out. What did you think of when you just hear the word kindness?
Mutuality.
Mutuality. Person.
Person.
A person.
Love.
Love.
Actions.
Actions.
Helping.
Healthy.
Helping.
Helping.
Sermon series.
Sermon series. That is the first time I have ever heard anybody answer that to this way, but that's awesome.
We're doing it after Easter.
All right, cool. You should post it and share it with people too, because I think that would. There have been a few folks that have used this as a series, so great sermon series. Other things, what do you think about?
I just had a feeling of relaxation.
Hmm.
The word kindness evokes a sense of letting go.
Feeling of relaxation, letting go. Yeah. Other things. Said it? Compassion in terms of kindness, because I think it's important to be able to think through what kindness means, so then we can decide how we're gonna address it. Okay, so let's go. So one of the ways that I began to think about what kindness meant was because of the Reverend Dr. Mr. Fred Rogers. Right? Some of you probably knew him, or you knew his wife Joanne. You've seen the documentary. How many of you have seen the documentary? If you haven't seen it, please go see it. It's is Mr. Rogers' Day coming up soon as well? March 20th, is that when it is? Okay, so Westminster John Ox may have some books, I guess. They might have something there as well. So Robin and I as soon as this documentary came out, we rushed to go see it. Because Robin tells the sweetest story about when she was little, she used to get dressed up for Mr. Rogers. That, there was that time where, you'd have a crush on somebody and she would get dressed up because she was going to go see Mr. Rogers. I'm like, oh, you love Presbyterian ministers then too. Weird, honey, but okay, we'll go with that. So we're watching this documentary, and Robin and I, from the first get out, we are in tears because it brings back, my kids didn't grow up on Mr. Rogers, and they're like, well, he sounds like he's a good guy, right? I mean, yeah, he's more than a good guy. Go watch the documentary. The first episode, this is not a spoiler because this has been out for a long time, so I don't feel guilty about telling you how it begins. The first episode of Mr. Rogers is, those of you who saw it, do you remember what it was? The first episode of Mr. Rogers was about King Friday building a wall around the kingdom to keep people out. This was in the middle of a political kind of firestorms that was happening during our time, and we're like, whoa. And I mean, he has a bunch of things. This is him, with the police officer putting his feet in a pool with a black man, right? There were lots of things. And Mr. Rogers grew in some other areas that he was challenged on too. But for me, he has always been a person that wasn't just about being nice. Right? It wasn't just about not raising conflict. It was about really seeing one another as human beings and what that meant. And the reason he was so powerful is that he felt when he was talking to the TV, you felt like he was talking to you. Like you felt like he was, yes, you are talking right to me, like you see me. And I think that is one of the things that has formed my aspirational kindness. And I say aspirational because while, I think if you were to ask people, they'd say, sure, Bruce is a nice guy, but I am not by nature a very kind person. I am super judgy, and most of the time I regulate that pretty well and have learned how to handle that well and not be terrible. But I think that takes work, and my natural proclivity is to be pretty judgy about people and trying to figure out how not to do that. Mr. Rogers challenges that quite a bit and wants us to think differently. My grandfather was also this way. Esteban de los Reyes, who I introduced to you earlier. The United States changed his name to Steve Reyes when he came to the United States, but I call him Esteban de los Reyes because it sounds so much better and that's his real name. So Esteban de los Reyes was one of the kindest person I've ever known and who you would ever known. And I know we say that about a lot of people. They were so kind. They were so, I would not say that about my grandmother. My grandmother had a different set of powerful traits Kindness was not one of them. She's in the book. She talks about, I'll tell a little bit of story about her. But my grandfather was incredibly kind. Someday I will write a book about my family when I won't totally offend everybody in my family. And all the things that he has done for people that nobody knows about that were based purely on his love for another human being. He went to jail in loyalty to a friend who was being accused of something who everybody knew he was guilty of. But my grandfather stood with him. I mean, my grandfather took care of people that he had no obligation to care for them. I mean, he was in some ways taken advantage sometimes, but was always willing and able and saw such depth in a human being that nobody was ever not deserving of his time. My grandfather passed that trait down in some ways. I'll tell you about my grandmother later, we also got that side. So we have this conflict in our family of being super hospitable and super judgy. So it's difficult times. But my grandfather has taken for most of us, reminds us about who we are to be. And so between these two gentlemen, I began to think about what it meant to be kind in the world, and to challenge myself to be kind. So my definition that I use is to be kind is to accept that each person is a created and complex human being, and to treat them as if you believe this to be true. So it's not just, yeah, you're a child of God, and then that's it. It's actually then acting differently. Now, if you have read this book, you will also know that it is not a religious book. If you read it, there are no Bible verses at the beginning. There's no religious language. This is the first book from Chalice Press that is a particularly non-religious book. So we're in a couple high schools now. We're on the reading list. We're trying to get into for first reads for colleges. So this is the first time that they've done that. But as you read it, as people of faith, you'll be like, oh, I see where that's from, right? I don't hide my faith. I tell stories about that. And so the only nod to that a little bit is in the created piece. And we argued a little bit about whether that was, whether the secular world would get that. And I think I argued that there are enough creation stories out there and kind of that understanding that it was okay. But ultimately what this means for me is that it's a choice to honor humanity in another person, and that the humanity that lies in ourselves. That we are taking seriously that you and I are complex and created human beings. And that feels obvious, but it is excruciating to do. And to live through the world as if everybody is complex. The people we like, we can easily do that. But the people we don't like, it's far easier to one-dimensionalize them and to offer ourselves as one-dimensionalized beings. And I think that is one of the reasons why we continually run into conflict that is not healthy, conflict that continues to tear us apart. And I'll talk later. I'm not a person that is I don't consider myself a bridge builder by any means, but I do think that we can engage each other in a way that builds up the body and doesn't tear it down. I don't expect myself to have coffee with every politician that I despise their policies, but I can still honor them as human beings. And I think if we can get to that point with each other, then, overall, the common good takes a step forward, which I'm going to clearly talk about a little bit later. All right, so there's a little bit of defining kindness, of how I define it. But one of the things that I think we have to begin to do is to think about what it means about kindness towards ourselves and what it means for us. So this is a picture. I never pass up a chance to show my babies off. So this is my middle. This is Ev, who's the oldest, and holding Abby, who is now turns 21 in 2 months. When we have young people around us, whether they're your own children or whether they're somebody else's, and I think we all raise everybody's children. That is the world I grew up in. I don't raise my children to never come back. I raise my children to be part of community. And so if you were to ask anyone, and we look at a child and we say, do we want this child to be kind? Nobody says no. I mean, if you say no, we're gonna be like, what? Now that may be, you have some weird idea about what kindness is, and so you don't want them to do that. But for the most part, if you say, do you want your child to be kind? Do you want this child to be kind? We all say yes, right? I mean, there's nobody that says no. But then we get to this point where we somehow don't want to do that anymore. Like as you ask adults, like, do you want to be kind? There's probably going to be a yes, but. Well, it depends. Well, it depends because you've defined kindness as a weakness in the world, as opposed to something that is powerful, right? We've decided that kindness is, in some ways, it's no longer worthy of us possessing or living out in the world. So I think what we have to do is we're going to begin to think about having kindness as more of a way for us to engage with one another. This is a picture I'll talk about a little bit later of the cafe that I go to almost every morning. I walk about a half mile, grab my coffee as my reward, and I walk back home. And I've got to know the baristas. I've taken a few people out there. Some of you know Amy Kim Kremis Parks. That's her face right there on the side there. And this is one of those places that I practice kindness that I intentionally, before I set foot in that property, I kind of say, now it's kindness time, right? Because again, not naturally kind. So I have to remind myself that we step into these spaces and build relationship with people that we might not normally do, and be able to do that as an adult. Because I think adults, again, we have decided that kindness is an afterthought. So what we're going to try to do today is to move it up to the front of our view in our world. So we're going to talk a little bit about ourselves. We're going to talk a little bit about other people, and then I want to talk about kindness about out in the world. So one of the things that I think as we go about this is there's the one part about being kind as a child, and we're like, okay, that's sweet. And then there's kind of this middle ground of like, well, kindness, but I want to make an argument that I think kindness is incredibly transformative, and it is one of the most powerful things we can do. How many of you have ever been part of the Civil Disobedience Act? Right? Great. That's not we're like, great, that's awesome. If you didn't, that's awesome too. But if you've ever been to that training, you know when you engage in civil disobedience, it is not about how do we just stay safe, right? It's not about trying to figure out how do you provoke. You're not trying to escalate. You're not at all trying to, you're not egging on violence, but you know you're going to be in a situation that might come about. So this is on your behalf to some extent, and others. The American Friends Service organized a group of us about 4 years ago now on the border to be arrested in response to our government's treatment of asylum seekers. This is when we were throwing tear gas over the border, over the walls, and so a group of us went and were trained and all that. This is not my first civil disobedience. The trainings are always helpful because the thing that reminds me that we can get caught up in is that the person standing across from me is an enemy and not worthy of dignity, right? That person who holds all the physical power in front of me, that person who is wearing something over their eyes, that person who has a baton, the person who is just waiting for the signal to do whatever they're going to do, that person too is a created child of God. Created, complex. My guess is always that there is some level of conflict going on, but part of civil disobedience for me in this idea of kindness is that I am acknowledging in that person that there is redemption, there is possibility, that you might be struggling, that I'm going to challenge you to see the same in my eyes. When you look at me, we are trained to look into the eyes or the place where their eyes would be, so that they have to look at us in a way that will challenge and give conflict to what they're being asked to do and the participating in the system that they're being asked to be part of. And we who are standing or kneeling are taught to do the same thing, to look into their eyes and not to think of them as demons or the enemy, but as humans who have been placed in a particular situation and are having to make choices. I think that kind of kindness is transformative. Because that is not just about being nice, it's not about avoiding conflict, it's not weak. I think it is powerful. Some of the most kind people I know are incredible activists because they stand on those lines not just to agitate. That's not the intent. The intent is to make folks understand that humanity is before you, and in doing so, I will see your humanity that is against me. And so when we have this argument about kindness being too nice, I point to these two edges, right? We always want our children to be kind, and I think kindness can be incredibly transformative and powerful. And then there's all the middle stuff that we're going to talk about too. So just want to begin with how I look at this. So kindness is not just about being nice. I know I've been accused of being naive and that you're being too nice and blah, 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 and I'm like, no, I'm not, I want you to hear, I'm not anti-nice. Like, I think nice is also contextual. Like, don't go out and just be mean because, well, Bruce said you don't have to be nice, so I'm like, no, that's not what I mean. But I do think that sometimes we will talk about kindness and folks are like, well, you just want us to be nice. I'm like, no, that's actually not what it is, because niceties often means avoidance of conflict, not rocking the boat, and encouraging people to be silent when they should speak out. So if being nice is what your kindness is, then I don't want that. What kindness is, again, it's not, I'm sorry, somebody's calling me right now on my phone. Good Lord. That's what I get for free. See, I forgot my remote that I usually use too. Okay, so again, it's not just about being nice. So if somebody wants to dismiss kindness as being nice, that's where I challenge folks like, well, according to my definition of kindness, that is not just about being nice. That it is about how we interact with each other. So I just don't buy into the idea that kindness is weakness, and so you haven't been able to hang out and talk with each other for a long time, so I hope you get to enjoy this. We will do this a bunch of times, so you get to continue to catch up and be with one another. I'm always one of those people too that I love packing as much in as we can. So I'd rather have folks be like, oh, so much, versus like, oh, we should have been done an hour ago. But let's, and we'll take some breaks in the middle of all this too. But so just let's popcorn out any interesting things that you've heard. Remember, don't share stories that aren't really your stories to share. But is there anything you wanted that the group would be that you would find interesting for the group to hear? Go ahead and yell that out, and I'll repeat if we need to. But anything that this is kind of a big group to do this, but we're going to try it anyway. Anything? Just need one to get it started. Yes, go for it.
We found a couple things. When we got out of our professional life and did something else, everything changed.
Oh, so a couple of Presbyterian groups now, online in Zoom, so Presbyterians tend not to stray. It's fascinating. Like normally by the end of that, somebody in the group decides, yeah, I'm not following him anymore. But I'm going to keep track now, denominationally, who are the ones that.
Discipline and order.
Yeah. I'm like, wow, we're living into the whole like order thing. We gotta cut that out. What's going on? And then I put my phone down. There it is. Okay, that's so funny. It is an interesting thing to do. If any of you are involved with Presbyterian Peace Fellowship, we're doing that as part of the Activist Council, and to watch it happen. To see as groups move and people, and you get kind of see who's following who, and on a Zoom screen, it creates a very different kind of full body experience as much as you can on a Zoom screen, which is really kind of fun. All right, so we're gonna move on. Let's talk about ourselves just a little bit. I know that I think we do a lot of performative empathy about ourselves, where we will say we're tired and we're weary, and I think we mean it, but then we don't actually do anything about it because we feel guilty about being tired. Culture tells us you should just power through, right? Grind culture. I posted something this past Monday, so some people have holidays on Monday, and grind culture tells you that you use that day to catch up on all the stuff that you can't do during your regular work hours. So that you're not actually, one, honoring unions who helped us to get holidays, but also like you're not actually taking vacation. Now, some people were talking about how some people don't get that, and that is totally true. And hourly workers don't often get that, but for those that have been given a holiday, I think sometimes we feel like we shouldn't actually take care of ourselves, and so we need to use that holiday as a way to continue to do work that we should have been able to do during the rest of our time that we've been agreed upon to work. And so part of what I think is important for us, is where I start around kindness, is about kindness towards ourselves in a variety of ways. So I think that part of this is that those of us that are in leadership, I consider all of you who are here and would come to a Presbytery meeting, have some kind of leadership info. Maybe it's 6 months. Oh my goodness, now like how do you keep planning? And it's so tiring, and I get that. And so part of it is that acknowledging that this has been a traumatic experience for us as communities and individuals. I'm not into the trauma Olympics. I'm not trying to decide who is suffering more or less. I actually think sometimes folks of privilege trick ourselves into thinking that we do not experience the same kind of, we don't experience trauma, or we're not experiencing exhaustion during this time because we, in good intention, would say. And so I'm really encouraged, if you have any of those thoughts right now around, well, but it's so bad for others, how can we think about ourselves? Just kind of set those, put them on the table, and you pick up those thoughts later if you need to, but really want us to focus on ourselves for a little bit. So one of the things I think is the reality is that we're navigating this pandemic leadership in a lot of ways. The political climate's happening, the racial reckoning that's going on, personal stressors, congregational expectations, all of our professional discernment you're hearing across the board, pastors who are struggling with call and what that means. There's a lot going on in our churches and in our communities. You're reading stuff about a lot of professions, a lot of communities, a lot of organizations. We are not special. I think we are experiencing the same kinds of things and decision-making that has to happen. And so I think about a lot of words. There was the New York Times article written probably a year ago now, I don't know when it was, that thing you're feeling is languishing. And I remember when that came out, everybody's like, oh, that's the word, right? And so that got overused. And then, but there's a lot of things out there. I think about languishing. I think about despair, those who have lost loved ones. I just think about overall weariness in the midst of all of this. But then I also think about these things that we've exhibited, the lingering, which I think is a hopeful space. I like languishing and lingering is kind of this harmony dance that's going on. I think there's been a lot of grace extended and received during this time. And I refuse to stop hoping. challenge us all the time to think about we're a resurrection people. If we give that up, then we are just a people that get together. And so that hope is important to continue, whether we always feel it or not, to know that it's there. I know some may be tired of talking about pandemic stuff, but I think it's important for us to do so because especially those of you and us that are in leadership in the church, it feels like it's an ongoing, personally, congregationally, municipalitily, I don't know what that means, the city, there must be a word for that. But just to begin to think about this, so I'm going to share a little bit about my cycle, about what I do and did. When first pandemic broke out, I think most of us are really good at adrenaline pastoring. Okay, I know what to do, we're going to jump right in. So we kind of jumped right in, we ran into immediate action, all based out of deep care and concern for our people. I know that for us to think about, we're going to not have worship this Sunday. Oh no! I just remember having that. What are we going to do? All these people are going to. I don't know what's going to happen, but it can't be good. So we have all this concern. So we try all this stuff. I don't know how many of your churches just said, well, clearly we need to do all these programs, and we have to have small groups, and we have to do this, and we have to do this, and do this. Whether or not people asked for it, we were doing things all over the place. We were over-functioning and all that, but there was a lot of grace. I experienced a ton of grace by folks in the church because it was impacting the whole world, right? It wasn't as if you, pastor, were doing this to us. It was like you are actually responding in the midst of what's going on in the world. And so there was a lot of grace. I hope there still is. I think that's been up and down for a lot of folks. A lot of understanding because, again, everybody was experiencing this, from retired people living in assisted living. We're experiencing it all the way to young adults out in the workplace, to if you had students, all that kind of stuff. So I think folks were grateful in many ways for what we were doing, but that was a lot of it was just adrenaline emergency places. And then we got to the point where it's like, oh dear God, this is not going to end. This is, I love the phrase, this is not sustainable. We use it all the time, but we don't do anything about it, right? I know, right? It's like, this is not sustainable. And do the same thing again, right? Yes, it's still not sustainable the fifth time around. So we overfunction. I had a friend who happens to be connected with a bunch of ministers and tweeted something super passive aggressive out that said, all of my pastor friends are overfunctioning right now. It wasn't a lie, but it was a little shady to do that on Twitter. We get overextended, all these things, right? We feel overwhelmed. Again, this is not just pastors, this is kind of life, right? You feel overwhelmed, you are doing our best. We've been told as leaders, our job is to be the non-anxious presence. That's just not sustainable. That was good. I just thought of that. That's how a comic ends their set and goes, I'll see you, thank you for being here. All right. I love being back talking to people. I don't know. I could just be talking to myself and be just as fun. Then we crash. Like maybe happening right now. No. So then we crash. We commit to some self-care because, again, we're supposed to do that. And then we repeat the whole cycle again. So if you are laughing, it means that you do this too. So I share this because I think it is true. This hasn't just been pandemic, but it's a lot of, in our life, it is compressed because it's real, right? This is not just episodic. It's been cultural and it's in everything that we're doing. And so its impact is much, much more. But then I think we have seen these moments of some dreaming. And I do not use the phrase silver lining. I just think there's been too much suffering and death. Now there are things that have emerged and been revealed, but I don't use silver lining as something out of pandemic. But there have been some things that have been revealed, things that have been magnified that allowed us to dream a little bit. And so to use another phrase that gets used too much is the new normal, is to be like, okay, so this kind of uncertainty is just going to be what it is, and begin to figure out what does that look like for everything from like meetings and pastoral care to just engaging with people. There's been some of that. We get to reflect on how we've done well. I'm really challenging communities and those of us involved in this to acknowledge that we've adapted quite well, actually, and probably been more adaptive than anybody would have ever thought we could be, not just as Presbyterians, but just as humans, to say, we're going to ask you to completely change the way you engage with one another, and for the most part, we have been able to do that. So I think that is pretty amazing, and we should honor that. And then we begin to reimagine, dream about what's next. What are the possibilities that have emerged from this? So I think we have that, but I think it's important though, and even though we're starting to dream, is to acknowledge that this is a traumatic time, and we're not just going to fall back into old patterns where we can just plan out what's next. And so our adaptivity is going to continue to be needed. And I want to acknowledge that for a lot of pastors and leaders, the question about our self-worth and about our call and about what it means to be part of congregations has been asked. And I think for members and people who, I shared this morning, that obligation is no longer enough to keep people coming to church. And so people have had these very questions, and I think I've talked with some of our folks, they're like, yeah, I'm not feeling it. And I'm like, I don't say I don't blame you. Preacher sucks. But I do, I get it. They're like making choices about where their energy goes, and they're not paid to be there, right? So if there's no real compelling reason to be there, why ask somebody to do that if they're not experiencing life out of that place? So that is a whole other question about how we create that. But I think we acknowledge that that's happening even within our community, and I know many of you probably in this space are just struggling with what it means to be called and to be part of the church. And so want to make sure we name that as we go, and that part of this is being kind to ourselves and what it means for us to acknowledge that we too are created and complex humans, and then to treat ourselves as if we believe that to be true. But what does it mean for us to take care of ourselves, so that not in this kind of trite, you need to be the best so you can be the best for others, but just to really take care of yourself, because we are God's created. And if we really believe that, and if we want others to do that with other people, then we have to do that with ourselves. So, I think one of the things that has happened, though, in the midst of this, that has really pushed this, is that our grace has been tested. This idea about whether we really want to extend grace to one another has only amplified some of the discomfort and conflict in the church, and that we're fighting over what do we do now, like what's the best way forward. I think my county, Santa Clara County, has not lifted indoor mask mandates yet, which means that we don't have to decide about that yet, which I love, right? I have other colleagues, I'm sure you all have had these conversations in other parts of the country, right, where you're having to decide, do you go with or not with what the county is doing? And maybe at one point you trusted what the county was doing, and then the next point you're like, not so much. And and at one point we're saying we trust what the county is doing, and then later on, like, I don't trust what the county is doing, right? So it's like you have all these things you got to navigate, and everybody is now experiencing different ways of dealing with things outside the church, work, school. It is terrible that what freedom gives us. But it does, right? It generates all of these things that we have to help folks navigate this, which again is, and I'll talk about this at the very end, means that we have to see each other beyond just that one-dimensional issue, question, thing. Like, you are not just my conflict around vaccines, masks, just whatever it is, right? That you are a complex child of God, and I'm going to treat you differently. But our grace has been tested. And so now I think we're being asked as a church to manage these polarities well, and we're asked, like, who are we really as a church? What does it mean for us to be the church in the world today? And so there's also productivity questions to bring answer, all that stuff. So for one of the things I think when we think about kindness for ourselves, I've been asking the question of myself and our congregation, the question about what is enough. What is enough? Because our world and culture, I think the answer is nothing. It's never enough. We always have to have more. What is it? We have in the congregation I serve, we have a legacy fund. It's not an endowment, it's a legacy fund. And the question about what is enough is a difficult one sometimes, because some people say it's too much, some people it's not enough, some people it's a rainy day, other people are like, well, but it never rains, right? I mean, there's all kinds of things, right? I don't know how many of you ever have conversations about this in your communities around money, but I also think what is enough is also about our relationships and how we engage with one another. Because I think what we, in good intention, what we believe is that we are supposed to put up with everything that everyone gives us all the time. And I think that is dangerous for us. Not only does that not honor the createdness of all of us, but it's not a healthy way to deal with conflict in a way that moves us somewhere. All it does is say that you have to take everything I give you, and I have to take everything you give me. And I think that is not what we should do. So I want to lift up a couple of illustrations of that, and then we'll have some discussion about that. So you met my mother before, Sarah Reyes. So Sarah is, again, a Presbyterian minister, but before that she worked for the state legislature in California for 25 years. And then she was a drug prevention teacher, instructor at my sister's high school. Terrible. Every time, I'm just like, oh, Deanne, your mom was catching your friends out being truant on the street. She's like, I know. It's terrible. My poor sister. I'm always like, glad that wasn't me. So then my mom decided she wanted to go to seminary, and he waited until after I left. But my mom was a single mom, and she was married to my father, who I have a relationship with now. But it was not good. They were, 18, 19 years old. My mom got pregnant. It was not a good time. So she was divorced from my dad early on. And then she married, and I tell the story in the book about a gentleman named David. And this is my mother now. I told a story about my stepfather named David. I don't change his name. His name actually is David, so I don't know if you can find him, but he's terrible, terrible person. Abusive and all those kinds of things. And I remember when my mother actually decided to leave him, I was fake sleeping in the back of the car, and they were arguing, and I heard her say, I've had enough, and left. So my mom's been divorced twice, has made these choices, has been kind of this amazing person in the world who modeled, without even trying to model, right? This idea that the kindness that she was going to live that day was towards herself. That she was not about having to stay in this relationship or this engagement so much so that it tore away from her own humanity. And in some ways, I think she was acknowledging as well, right, that it was no longer a relationship that was also creating pain and trauma for him. And so my mom now, right, this is my mother now, is still that person who reminds me all the time, I don't have to put up with that. And you see her play that out in Presbytery meetings. She's like, I'm not going to put up with you saying that in that way or to that person. And again, and I just passed that trait on to my kids, clearly, right? But but my mom continually reminds me that there is a place where you say that is enough, and I'm either going to walk away from that situation, or I'm going to challenge you to step away from that situation. Now, it's not forever, but it is in that moment, and that is a kindness that I think we don't often do. We often will sit there, and if you don't do it, what I've learned from my mother, right, is if we remain silent in those moments, we just allow things to perpetuate themselves. And so being nice then just allows for abuse, is that we need to do that because ultimately that affects other people in the room. I love this picture of my mom because she has 3 water bottles in her hand. My mother is the star of an hour and it tracks your heart rate and does all this thing. My mom is 72 years old and goes 5 times a week. And I go with her a couple times a week and she just talks smack the whole time to me. She is just like, is that all the splat points you have? And I'm like, so she has, what you've seen though is a person who has made these choices over her life, and she would not say about herself, but has grown into who God is encouraging her to become and continues to do so. And so that is a kindness that she has done to herself, right? So as you think about when those moments that you've taken so much and not said enough, that is not a kindness to yourself because we haven't acknowledged the createdness and the complexity of our own selves, and we've allowed ourselves to receive over and over again things that tear us down or diminish us or strip away our humanity. And especially for when we want to do that with others, we don't want to do that with others. We want to see humanity in others, but yet we let people do that, strip it away from us. And that, it goes across the board. And so part of what I hope we'll do is, and personal interaction around politics. I'm going to talk a little more specifically about this, but whenever every book group I go to, anything is like, well, okay, so the person who you really disagree with politically, how do you bridge that divide? Right? And I'm sure many of you have that question. I don't actually think every church is going to be that space. I don't think every person can hold that space. It is a particular calling to pastor a congregation that is legitimately purple. I don't think we actually have very many. I think we have churches that are mostly one thing, and then you have a few very loud of the other. I think that would be from anecdotal experience that it's usually very few, because it's a lot of work if you are really balanced in that way. And most of us are not equipped to do that. I actually feel like sometimes what happens when we talk about the bridge building and finding that common center is that our edges get pushed away. And what that happens often is for marginalized people, they get left behind because we want this somehow mushy center. And so marginalized folks often don't get their voices heard. So that's just one thing. The other part about it, though, is I know these interactions happen because they happen to me all the time. The reason you're looking at a soccer picture, you're like, why is that picture up there? Is because, one, we are the family that does things like this. So, do any of you know what VAR is?
No.
There are no soccer people. I'm not in my crowd, apparently. What is that? Go ahead.
It's like the replay, like get the video.
Yes, so video. So this is the World Cup in France, the Women's World Cup, and they were first time using VAR, video assistant referees. So of course we were like, they wouldn't let us bring our signs in though. This is outside the stadium. They got taken away. In any case, so we're big soccer people. So I've spent a lot of time on the soccer sidelines, and like I shared before, I've always felt like I've been more of the chaplain on the sidelines. Like I was always sent to talk to the dad who was about to get kicked out of the game. I was always the one like, Bruce, can you go? I'm like, doesn't mean that I'm going to do that very well. Because I agree with him, that call was, no. I generally, I just never, so my rule was don't get on YouTube and don't embarrass your children unnecessarily, right? Sometimes it's fine, but on the soccer sideline, don't embarrass your children and don't get recorded. Like, you do not want to be that person. But, soccer becomes sometimes a little bit wild. I had the joy of watching 2 of my kids play on the same high school team. Which was so fun if you're a soccer or a sports person or whatever things your kids do. And so I was sitting on the sideline, and if some of you remember after Trump was elected, there was a walkout. Some schools walked out. You may have heard about San Francisco. A bunch of schools walked out. Well, my kids were leading their walkout of their school. It was really funny. Some of their friends like, well, we need to ask our parents' permission. And my kids are like, we do? It's like, oh, my babies. So after this all happens, we're at a game with another parent. And I'm just honestly and innocently just making small talk. I was not at all trying to do anything. And I say, so did our kids could ever do? And I'm like, so there's choices we make every day, right? So that was a choice point to walk away or to engage. So of course I engage. So I say, well, you know, Abby and Annie led that. And they're like, well, I think it's a waste of time. Why would you have your kids doing that? It doesn't make any difference at all. I'm like, another choice point. So I continue to engage. That it's important for our young people to stand for what they believe and make some kind of, well, it's a waste, it won't do anything, it doesn't matter, I know that was bad, but it doesn't, the whole thing. It eventually got to the point where he says, yeah, it's going to be terrible for people, but I'm going to make a lot of money during this presidency. Which is not an uncommon, privileged, wealthy perspective of those 4 years. And I will say, sidebar, many churches made a lot of money during those 4 years on their endowments and legacy funds. And if you're a church that didn't agree with the policies of that, have to question about what you do with those funds that were made during that time. That's a whole nother sermon. Stepping back into the soccer sideline. So dark red, and I'm not sure what I said, but it was a silent, seething anger, apparently. But I did have a choice point. I could keep engaging or walk away. And at that, for the first time that day, I made a good choice. And I said, James, I'm going to walk away now. And James could not let it go. No, we need to figure this out. I'm like, no, I'm going to walk away now. It's better that I walk away. And just kept going. But it was one of those moments that it was so clear that in that moment, I needed to walk away. Not just, out of embarrassment or not wanting to make YouTube, all that, but because we would have said or done things or whatever that could have been really destructive to our I don't think we were going to come to blows, but destructive to our relationship and our family's relationship and the school. I mean, there's all kinds of ramifications. And so making the choice to walk away was a kindness to myself, to James, and to the community around us. And I think too often we get into this thing that we need to work this out now. We need to figure it out and not have the foresight to say, no, maybe the thing that honors our humanity and dignity most is to step back a little bit sometimes for a moment, maybe not forever, but to step back in a way that says we re-engage when we're able to do so with a little bit more kindness towards one another. This shows up as well when there are instances of racism that happen in a community, where when somebody says something, and say you say something super racist about Asians, and I get really angry. One of the things that we want folks to do who get angry is we want them not to be angry. And as fast as you can not be angry, do that. And so what we do is we make people sit in situations that aren't going to be helpful to them or to us. And so part of this walking away is acknowledging that some people need to walk away from us. Just for a moment, but just until we can come back and have conversations that actually will be constructive and build up. So the kindness to ourselves in this first section is really about how we understand one another, but mostly about how we engage ourselves in these acts. Like, how are we being kind and recognizing the humanity and complexity of ourselves? When have you been kind to yourself? And I really wanted to think about describe what that's like. When have you been kind to yourself? Not just, maybe it's something, it feels small, but really honor the humanity and dignity of and creativeness of yourself. And then in what areas of your life do you need to be more kind to yourself? What are those places that you need to be more kind to yourself? So, and then after we do a little feedback, then we'll take a real break. So let's do about 10 minutes or so. Go ahead and circle up in your group, and then we'll do a little sharing, and then we'll take a break. Yep. I think you just get them. Oh, I think they bought them for you. Oh, I see. I would talk with Philip, ask, because the Presbytery bought them.
Okay.
So,
Philip
Philip Watts, I don't have my glasses on.
Oh, right.
He was the guy up here talking at the very beginning. Because my guess is he was just going to take his wife. They bought, so part of what they did is that they buy, I think it was 250 copies for the Reyes Chow.
So if I purchase them for mid-Kentucky residents,
Yes. So, well, Philip is, let me ask him what he bought for it. That might be.
Sorry, quick question. So if they want to buy more books for their church, but I know you have a stack of them, who should they make the check out?
Why don't you go ahead and finish up whoever's talking and we'll come back together. All right, so we'll just do a little bit of feedback and then we'll take an actual stretch break if you get a little time, and then we'll finish up. All right, so any reactions, story, thing you want to share real quick? We'll try this one more time to see if was there anything that bubbled up in your group that would be great for the community to know. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the microphone. That way. I was going to say I played Donahue, but most of you probably don't remember who Donahue was. Anybody want to share? And I just messed up the live stream, didn't I? Anybody have anything?
I got a question.
Yes, question.
How are you kind to yourself? I don't mean this autobiographically, but how is one kind to themselves when another wants to deny you your own uniqueness or your own humanity or your own goodness?
Yeah, so how does one express kindness to yourself when the other wants to so that's what I think we've been trained to stay in that relationship. We've been trained to stay in that because somehow we're supposed to receive that kind of depending on what is like abuse and absorb all that, I think you walk away. I just feel like people are not entitled to strip away your humanity or dignity, and that's online or in person. Now again, it doesn't have to be forever, but I simply don't think that God wants us to absorb that for the sake of allowing somebody else to behave however they want. I mean, I think it goes to a very, like when in our congregation, too many churches say all are welcome, and I just think that it's just one of those phrases that I'm like, talk more. Because I think we aren't all welcome, and I'm of the, it's not new, right? All beliefs are welcome, but not all behaviors are. And so if you come into the congregation I'm serving, you can believe all you want about our LGBTQIA people and our trans folks who are in our community. You do not get to behave in a way that strips away their humanity. Now, if you feel that's stripping away your humanity, you can have that discussion with me. But so I have had to tell people that behavior is not welcome here, and let's have conversation about where you might want to go or how you change that. I also have been in situations where folks have wanted to strip away my humanity, right? Where I do remember, that's probably 12 years ago, kids were still trick-or-treating, and turning the corner and seeing this person in costume, in a full coolie costume, I don't know if you all remember coolie workers, slanted eyes, hat, the whole thing, Q on there, and is doing a little like Asian wobble kind of thing down in San Francisco, no less. And I'm like, how are you not getting beat up yet? Like, what is going on? Not that I'm condoning violence, I'm just asking. So Robin could see, right, that I, like that same seething, and had to be like, walk away, right? Because that person was stripping that dignity away from me, and I had choices to make. And fortunately, most of the time I make the right one and walk away. So I think that's where that idea that we have to stay in relationship no matter what, I think is intellectually I understand it, but practically, often it means that the abuser takes precedent and their voice gets more elevation than those who are abused or marginalized. So I think when somebody's doing that to you, you walk away from that. And again, it may not be forever, but in that moment, I don't think we allow people to strip away our dignity and our humanity. Okay. Other thoughts, questions that came up for you all that you want to share? There doesn't have to be. All right, the grand experiment. Let's take a break. I'm going to start talking again at 10 after 4. So wherever you may be is okay. I'm just going to start talking again at 10 after 4.
to me the first time, but the second time I realized I don't really need to listen to this guy anymore. Mike heard me. He's all paying attention. If I get everybody to come on in and have a seat real quick, we'll get back to Bruce. Bruce. Do we have to do it? The Lord be with you. The Lord be with you. Come on, guys. Come on back. Come on with me. Thank you.
Lift up your hearts.
Lift up your hearts. Yeah, what do we do? How many do we do before we put your head on your desk when you're ready?
The teachers.
Yeah, teachers, scouts. What do we need to do? Oh, there we go. Before we get back to Bruce, we have one more person we would like to recognize and just give him a brief opportunity to greet, and that is our distinguished Senate Executive Greg Goodwiller. So, Greg, welcome.
Thank you. I am delighted to have this opportunity to be with you, to bring you greetings from your Synod, which is your 3 presbyteries and 9 others, located mostly in the states of Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, and Mississippi. I became the Synod executive about 6 months before the pandemic, so I have mostly been a pandemic executive, trying to figure all this stuff out with everybody else. Delighted, very happy to be out and about and looking forward to more opportunities into the future. This event is actually what we call in the Synod a presbytery partnership. That is, when 2 or more presbyteries decide they want to do something together, the Synod jumps in with them, gives them some money, including for this event, and we have more money to spend on such things in the future. So part of the idea of getting you together is to promote partnership together and think about ways that creatively 2 or more of you can do other kinds of ministry and mission together. So I look forward to working with you, not only being your executive, but working on partnerships and ways to move into the future, especially around Matthew 25, which the Synod has accepted as an invitation. And so we look forward to being with you, and I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much.
So if you haven't read the book, I do a whole chapter on meetings. And one of the ways that we are and this is, I'm not judging at all, I really am not. But I have tried to, in our meetings, one of the things I talk about is time. So our session always starts on time. I don't know how many of our sessions start on time before this. So we always start open prayer at 7 o'clock. And what has happened is that people show up. And it was like, people are like, we're starting on time now. I'm like, because we said we're all going to be back here at 7 o'clock, right? And I think that part of what we do in the world with each other is acknowledging the multiple humanities that are around us and how we honor that for each other. So this next section I want to talk about, I'm going to go through just 3 or 4 or 5 things about people right around us and who surrounds us. This is, I think I shared before about a friend who didn't want to read the book because it changed the way that they would behave. And this is that section, really, because part of what we have to do, again, we're acknowledging that people are created and complex, and not just that, but then we take the step to actually change our behaviors, and that we act as if we really believe it. And so I want to give a few examples about that. One is, especially during pandemic time, I think it's important for us to realize that none of us are thriving. I just feel like very few people are at their best selves right now. And if we can acknowledge that very few of us are at our best selves, then our expectations and assumptions about the other people can be mitigated. It doesn't mean we're allowing people to be abusive to us, but it does gesture that maybe a little grace should not just be received, but extended. And I know that I'll talk a little bit about what it means to apologize later. Like I've had to say to my session, I'm sorry, that was not a good reaction. And I need to just acknowledge that I may not have handled that in the best way. And I think that part of that is being vulnerable to say I'm not in my best self, but also as a way to acknowledge that we all aren't. So that's the first thing I want us to think about, especially during these phases. I think it's easier if we're pastoral leadership. My mom used to say, God, church would be so much better if it weren't for the people. And I'm like, Mom, again, I get it from somewhere. But part of it is that I think sometimes it's easy for us pastors to kind of, the congregation would just, but it's also for me is to remember that the folks that I'm pastoring are also struggling, and churches as a whole, as organisms, can feel the same rejection and struggle that individuals do. And so as I'm hoping folks see my complexity, I'm challenging myself to see that in others, and that we are all, in some ways, not at our best selves. And if we can acknowledge that, then I think we kind of move into a place where we're all a little bit of our best selves. So that's the first thing. But specifically, want to talk about a few things. The first is that to see complexity in another person is we have to acknowledge that we all are coming from different places and we see the world through different lenses. I've told this story in a couple places, but this is one of the story that I tell all the time about this is about an elder in the first congregation I served named Lucille. Lucille was one of those pillars of the church. And if any of you know those pillars, some of you are those pillars, difficult to move. Right? If you think about pillars and their actual purpose, right? You just think about why they're there. It's not to move. Again, don't laugh too hard because you may be the pillar, right? When I tell the story often when I'm preaching in a place, I'm like, don't look at anybody right now because you may catch that they're looking at you. In any case, Lucille, but also pillars, they are the folks that help keep the church going, right? Especially when you're brand new, they're going to make sure that things keep going while you're learning what to do. But at the beginning of our relationship, Lucille and I had this very much like two alpha dogs trying to figure out who's going to lead. Lucille told me early on, I will never forget that she reminded me, she said to me, Bruce, I've been an elder longer than you've been alive. Just in passing, she just mentions this. Shade early, right? That is just, and then the other thing that she did, which I didn't realize what was happening, is when I got there, she was on the pastor nominating committee, so she wanted me there apparently. But when we went out to the narthex, they still had, and I don't know if this church has it, but a lot of churches you have the pictures of all the previous pastors. And she walked down each of them and told a little story just to let me know that she knew a little bit about each of them. Like she had something on each of them. I mean, it was probably not real cool, the thing she told me. And then she gets to the end, and Betsy Massey, who had been a stated clerk in our denomination for a long time, was the last pastor before me. And then Lucille says, and after Betsy's, then your picture will go there. And underneath all the pictures, it has how long their service was. So I thought it'd be cute. So Lucille, how long am I going to be here? And she says, we'll see. Like, touche, Lucille. So Lucille was one of those people. Lucille was in charge of the flowers. So Lucille, every Sunday after church, would pick up the flowers. These are not the flowers themselves. We did not have phones as much at that time to be able to take just a random picture off the Googles. So she would get the flowers, take them to the local retirement community, and then look at the flower chart. Some of you may have the flower charts or people sign up still. I think they're super awesome. Our young people actually love flower charts. It's super retro now. It feels like it's an interesting dynamic. In any case, So she would then look at the name and then call that person up, tell them the procedures that have been the same procedures for the last 30 years about how to order, where to put them, get them to the office, and then on Sunday morning, Lucille would get there, she'd get the flowers out of the office, center them in the sanctuary right in front of the communion table. There was like a ring in the carpet because that's where they went every time and put them there. But she would still back up down the middle of the sanctuary and like center them. Like, there's a ring right there. Like, did something move? So, and then she would go and then she'd water them and she would remind me not to water them too much because then it would spill out and there'd be a stain on the thing and I'd be like the ring that is there? And then she'd sit down and be in the fourth row on the right with her husband Marty. So Marty, the Tobiasons, would sit over on the right-hand side. And one Monday morning, so Monday I used to come in and kind of recover and just clean up and do all the stuff that Mondays. And Lucille comes knocking on the door of the outside office. And you could, boom, 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 you could hear her knock. And Lucille was one of those that was pretty proper. Like, she dressed up when she went out. I'm sure she didn't like the way that she knew I was heading to worship and all the formal stuff. And you could also tell she was mad because she just said, "Is Bruce in?" Not, "Is Pastor Bruce in?" Like, it was very clear that I had zero credibility with whoever she was at that particular moment. And Inga, our church administrator at the time, which I think church administrators, their primary job is to protect the pastor, first and foremost, says, "Yeah, he's in his office." I'm like, and Inga, she told me, she's like, "I'm more scared of Lucille than of you. So you're going to lose every time, my friend." So Lucille comes to my office, and there's no embellishment here. I kicked the door closed. And so, thinking that maybe she'd walk by, did not happen. She knocks on the door. "Bruce, are you in there?" I was right out of seminary and conflict avoidant. So I seriously considered just staying quiet. But I didn't. So what I did do is I moved behind my desk to make sure that she knew whose office it was, right? This piece of furniture, lady, signifies my power. So she stands on the other side of the desk and says to me, "Bruce, do you know what happened this Sunday?" And I think, I do not. Now, I've done things in worship. Early on, I swore from the pulpit accidentally. This is not when... Today you might get away with it. Maybe you wouldn't. I don't know. But I just said pissed. And you'd have thought that I dropped the F-bomb from the pulpit. Because people, I got notes, handwritten notes. At that point, we weren't doing email, I don't think. And she says to me, "Do you know what happened?" I'm like, "No, I don't know what happened." And then she would say, "You don't know what happened?" As if changing the emphasis on a different syllable would jar my memory. I'm like, "I do not know what happened." No. So eventually she says, "You really don't know?" I'm like, "Lucy, I don't know what happened." And she says to me, "The flowers were in the wrong place." And before, so you're getting to know me, there are these choice moments that happen. And there's a good choice, and then there's a poorer choice. So the good choice would have tried to work that, had a conversation. The poor choice, which I made, obviously, was to say, "Lucille, I don't care." Yeah, not good, not good. I know that now. It's like trying to put toothpaste back in a tube. It just gets worse as you try to do that. So then we go at it, and it's the whole thing, and finally we make up. And by the end of my call there, Lucille was one of my greatest supporters, great champion of what we were trying to do. She was wonderful. But what I learned in that moment was this, that we had two strong personalities trying to figure out what was going to happen. And I just assumed, as she did, that my lens was not just the right lens, but was the only lens that we should ever look through. And all that I could be reminded of was that Lucille had been there for decades. She, as she reminded me, she was an elder longer than I was alive. But she had been there, her kids were born there, they were baptized there, friends had been married and friends had died, there were other weddings, there were all this kind of things, and she experienced that all through, from that fourth pew on the right, through the lens of those flowers. And the person that was supposed to be called to help tend to her and pastor her, who she was part of the nominating committee that called me there, just basically said that whole experience didn't matter. Now, we could argue intellectually about whether the flowers actually matter, which they don't. But that's not the point, right? The point was that her lens through which she moved through the world, in that way they did. And so my kindness element there is that I need to see, even if I don't agree with what they're thinking or doing, that they're operating with a different lens. And that folks are coming to a space with, perspectives that are important for us to understand. We don't have to agree with them. And again, if they're causing abuse and violence, that's one thing. But if it's just a way somebody is moving through the world that we simply don't agree with, that is not worthy of tearing down their dignity and one-dimensionalizing them. She could easily become a caricature for us, and she has for many churches, right? The old church lady who doesn't want to move the flowers. Well, that's not just all Lucille was, right? That was part of who she was, clearly, but it was also this dedicated, loving person that took time to give to the church and manifest her calling through so many things, more than we can name. So I think a kindness that we need to figure out as we begin to move through this is to know that no matter who is in our view and who we engage with, they're all carrying some different lens, right? This goes back to understanding that everybody is carrying some kind of pain, but I want us to think about it a little deeper, that we're all moving through the world with a little bit different lens in our world. The other piece is, so I'm just going to list off a few of these, and hopefully this will strike you, some of these. There's a chapter I write on everyday kindness, and I talk a little bit about the kindness we learn during school pickups and drop-offs. And I met with a book group, and all they could tell me were road rage stories. Like, okay, that's what we want to spend our hour doing, but they love this chapter because we all have road rage stories. But it really does, I talk a little bit about this idea that sometimes we can exhibit kindness mostly in our everyday things, and that was something that I did for years, was to drop my kids off to and from school. And I have a general rule that within 2 miles of the school, you don't honk at anybody. Because if you honk at somebody 2 miles within the school, when you get to school, they will either be in front of you or in back of you. I guarantee. I also, when I would drive my kids to school, there was this particular intersection that I know it doesn't, maybe it does make sense. I'm a super rule follower when it comes to certain things. Traffic is one of them. Because I think when it is a solid line, you are not supposed to cross it. Like, that's the rule. And there's this place coming up to the school where you have dotted, your opportunity, if you plan well ahead, to move over so you can get in the turn lane. But if you pass up that opportunity that has been given to you, you now must turn right, because that's a solid white line. I don't understand why people don't prepare themselves. The white line was there yesterday. The dotted line was there as well. But every time somebody would try to move over past that dotted line, and every time my kids would be like, "Dad, let them in." Well, how will they learn? Which I do have a hard time giving that up, because how will they learn? But I also know that I had this anger about me that it became when did I become the traffic police and when did it become that I owned the land that was under my vehicle and apparently in front of me, and I was the one who got to decide whether you could be on that land or not. I mean, you begin to think about why we possess and car rage and all that becomes we are silly people. But my kids, they could almost predict Dad, let them in. That's not good, right? If your kids are like, all right, Dad's about to be a jerk right now, we better warn him. Like, I mean, it's not like, they were my dotted line, right? Like, you had a chance, Dad, to not be a jerk. Every morning, same time. So a part of me is I have to actually prepare myself to not deny people the opportunity. And part of what I have come to think about that whole drop-off experience is, while we were not a family that rushed and did all that kind of stuff, we were really trying to just take our time and move through the day well. Other people's lives and situations did not allow for that. And so how they're moving through the world needs a little bit of kindness. And if I can offer just a gesture every once in a while to park instead of, holding up the line, or to let somebody in, or to not honk, or to whatever, or to pay attention to other people in the room. I mean, all the things we could do. If I could do that in those spaces, then possibly somebody feels a little bit more human that day. And I think there's something about that is every day I can practice that or not practice that. And every drop-off, right, 5 days a week for years, I could practice that or not practice that. And so I think part of what we're trying to do as well is to not just do the grand gestures and when the political fights happen, but what happens in the everyday. What are the things that become habitual in order for us to move forward with the posture of kindness? I am going to super run out of time, so I'm sorry. I'm going to have to keep moving through here. Let me stop. All right. So this is a quick one, kind of matches the last one I did. Folks have asked, well, what can we do? So one is to make kindness a habit. So the thing that I suggest for everybody is the next time you go to the grocery store, before you go in, you take a breath and you decide you're going to walk through your grocery experience with a lens of kindness. And then how does that change how you go through a grocery shopping experience? Right? I mean, think about all the things we do or say or don't do, or the gestures or the dismissals or whatever we do while we're grocery shopping. And what happens if you do that with a different lens? To think that everybody is operating as a complex person, and how we react to that and engage with each other and all of that. So that's one thing. I'll usually talk a little more about that, but that's one habit building piece that I actually do when I'm moving into a space or I'm going somewhere, as I take a breath and I'm like, I'm going to be kind. And you kind of walk in, especially if I'm not feeling particularly kind in the moment, or I'm stressed out or whatever's going on, to walk into that space a little differently. All right, so I think this is one's real important, is to practice apologizing. So most apologies that we see now in the world are not really apologies. Right? They are, please stop feeling the way you feel about me because I don't like it. And I'm sorry that you were X, right? I'm sorry that you were offended. I'm sorry that mistakes happen, right? There's nothing about ownership. And it's mostly what we've done to apologies, we've made them transactional. We've made apologies about, if I do this, then I expect you to do this, right? If I apologize to you, and even if I admit deeply and honestly that I've hurt you, and I lament that, and I will try to change my ways, all that. Now I expect you to forgive me and receive that, and now we can go back to when we weren't in this conflict. Now that may happen, but apologies, I believe, that are genuine, acknowledge that that person, that humanity that stands before you has agency and isn't actually required to return anything for that apology. In fact, our kindness to that person is seeing that person as a complex person that has agency about themselves and how they react. I liken this to politeness and sometimes how we transactionalize politeness. So here's the example I use. When I say thank you, you say right. Right. So now, if people have gone up to my kids, it probably happened to kids too. They'll say to your kid, thank you, and then look at them. And there's part of me for my kids, I'm like, don't say it. Because we've turned gratitude into a transaction. Because I actually am not saying thank you so that you can acknowledge that I thanked you. I'm not anti-politeness. Like, I'm not saying don't be polite. But I think what too often happens in our culture is that we have transactionalized and commodified every interaction. And we expect something in return for everything that we do. I think that when we do things like, I'm waiting for my you're welcome, I'm like, well, then you really weren't thankful. You just wanted to be acknowledged that you said you were thankful. If you're really thankful, you could say thank you, and then you could be on your way. And I'm not going to actually pause, be like, you gonna say it? No, right? So I think that that's part of apologies as well. And so I think we have to practice that, because I don't think we're ultimately very good about that. Like if you have raised children, you were a child, you had parents, like how many times do we apologize parent to child? I think if your child or a child has never heard an adult apologize to them in a way that is genuine, then how do they learn how to do that themselves? How do they learn that it is okay to admit that you might have done something wrong? And there have not been many times that I've been willing to do that with my kids, but there have been times where I've had to say, I'm really sorry, I reacted too much, right? Whatever. And we will say to them, you don't need to do anything in response to that. And we can just leave them to however they want to, because it is not about assuaging their hurt in a way that makes us feel more comfortable. It's allowing them to know that somebody has acknowledged that their humanity has been hurt in some way. So we need to practice that more often in our churches, in our communities, and I think when we do that, again, we're exhibiting humanity to one another. All right. Online. So some of you remember General Assembly in Portland, where I got trolled by Roseanne Barr. Some of you may not remember that. I remember it because it is a highlight of my social media life. So somebody says, Bruce, is that Roseanne Barr? And I'm like, gosh, I hope so. Because at that point, she had much more social media juice than I did. So I'm like, sweet. So yeah, I got put on blast by Roseanne Barr because that was the General Assembly that we were debating divestment from companies who were making a profit from non-peaceful pursuits in the Middle East. Well, you know how that goes over. And at that point, Roseanne was a super conservative Jewish person, and then put us, the denomination, on blast during our debate. Some of you may have been there, may have been blissfully unaware this was going on, but many of us were just like, wow. Like, it was very funny. We were more engaged that it was Roseanne Barr than actually anything that was being said. But it was an opportunity for us to see how we engage kindly online. So when we think about online interaction today, I think most folks would say, gosh, it's terrible. I will say that 95% of my interaction online has been positive. Like, most of it has been positive. And some of that is self-generated, because I simply do not have energy or time to troll other people and just go out and ad hominem attacks on people. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Because the other thing is, we have an opportunity to model a different way of being. So I get trolled by Roseanne Barr, and I actually engage her. So I'm not sure what you mean by this. What do you mean by this? I'd love to have more conversation, right? To actually begin to see if she's willing. Now, she clearly was not. But after that, some people who had been put on, who had been dragged to us, were like, somebody said, well, this guy's not terrible. I'm like, I know, I'm not, I hope I'm not terrible. But like that whole, it engaged with people on that secondary level in a way that actually, like, they disagreed with what we were doing, but we weren't kind of the horrible people that, you know, that we had been shared out to be. Part of, I think, our online world is that many of us think we're funnier than we really are. We think it's our job to be sassy and snarky, and I actually think our job mostly is to live with the same kind of kindness that we would in the regular world, in our in-person world. That I want to meet you, if I meet you after seeing you interact online, I don't want to be like, oh, they're a lot nicer in person. Like, what does that say about your online presence? Or the other way around, I suppose, could happen too. Like, you're really nice online, but in person. Right, but so I think one of the things that we do is we have to be consistent between the two. Online world sucks us into this vacuum where we, I think, easily start to engage in interaction that instinctually one-dimensionalizes one another and strips away our humanity. If you follow me on Twitter, I probably drive you a little bonkers a little bit sometimes, because I tweet about a lot of things. I am mediocre at a great many things and have opinions about a lot of things, but I do it on purpose. So the reason I tweet out a lot of different things is there is no way that you can one-dimensionalize me. So it is not just happenstance. There is thought put behind how I want to force people to know that I am not just this opinion, I'm not just this position, I'm not just this whatever, but all of these things make up who I am, because I will actually do that with you. If somebody comes at me online, I will see first if they're trolling. If they're trolling, they don't deserve, they're not entitled to our time. But if it's somebody who really wants to interact, then I will go and have interaction, because that's what I would do in person. If you come to me and our only purpose is to tell me how terrible I am, you don't get my time. But if you want to say, I really disagree with you about this, let's talk about this, then I'm up for it. And that's consistent. So I think your online world, as you're engaging online, how does your online vibe and feel compared to your in-person? And are those consistent? So I think that's another thing. All right. This is one that I think too often we buy into pretty easily. Some of you remember the speech that then President Trump gave. I think it was the Naval Academy or one of the military academies. And afterwards, there was a lot of comments made that he had needed 2 hands to drink a glass of water, and then he needed to hold the rail while he walked down the ramp. I don't know if you remember this, right? So I don't want to I'm not going to draw false equivalencies between left and right, and I'm not doing that. But I want to challenge those perspectives that dipped into this ableist well of attack. Right? My ableist, not my folks who call people out on ableism, the disabled communities that I'm part of or follow, friends, they're like, what the hell is this? Why are we now saying that if you need to hold a rail while you walk down a ramp, or you need 2 hands to drink a glass of water, you are not capable of X? In our attempt to be witty, to be cutting, to whatever, we stripped away the humanity and dignity of people that we didn't even know we were doing that to. It's one thing, I don't think we shouldn't do that to anybody, but in doing so, because we thought it was okay to do it to this particular person, we end up doing that to entire communities. It's lazy, and I think it is destructive, and it's dehumanizing. And so even, I'm pretty clear in this book, right, that I'm not a big fan of President Trump. But you will never see in my thread and my stream passing any kinds of language that are ad hominem attacks on his body, on his appearance, on his intellect, any of that, because those are ableist tropes that too many of our friends, neighbors, selves, some of you here, have been hearing for your entire life. So I think that's one of those things that we have to be really careful about how we too easily dip into that. And that's one of my activist friends, Mike, I got a chapter you probably should read, right? The behavior piece, it's really difficult because it feels good to go ahead and go after people. So in lieu of that, what I would say is find your venting space, but don't have it be online. Everybody needs a venting space. Everybody needs that space, but don't do it online. I just feel like it is not worth it, because if you do and you hurt somebody, then it's up to us to go back and repair that. And we all need a venting space. I mean, our living room during debates, I think is really entertaining, but I would never put any of that online. That'd not be smart. And it's not always kind, right? I mean, it's kind of like there's those moments where you just got to put stuff out, but just don't do it online, because we get then into this trap of dehumanizing people without even realizing it. All right, we were going to do breakouts, but I think we're actually going to run out of time, so I'm going to keep going. All right, there's your break. Okay. You can always just stand up and stretch. It does not affect me at all if you need to stretch. All right, here's as we kind of, oh my gosh. I was at one point I'm like, you gave me that much time. I'm never going to be able to fill that much time. So what I hope for you as you move into this next space is that you do choose kindness, but it is really difficult and it is exhausting work. I think that part of what we have to do, just as if you are choosing to be anti-racist, you're choosing to understand gender differently, you're choosing to fight misogyny, whatever things that we naturally lean into, you have to choose to be different. Kindness is the very same way. You got to wake up every day, or when you're walking to a restaurant or a grocery store, whatever, and choose to be kind, because I think we often, in times of stress especially, but just in general, we're focused on ourselves, and we need to push ourselves to look outward. I want to end as I talk about this part, because I think it's important for the world. The subtitle is not one that I picked. I tease the publishers all the time. I'm like, save the world. You just upped the game on this book. But they were also like, well, if you're not going to say something bold, don't write a book. I'm like, okay, that's fair enough. Because I do think that what we do and how we show kindness is transformative. This is my favorite picture of my wife at a protest. She loves this picture. So I'm like, can I show this one all the time? She's like, yeah. So I have a blanket permission from Robin to share this one. I think that protest is one of those places where we can show kindness. I think many in our churches, maybe even ourselves, will often say, if they would just protest differently and not make everything so inconvenient, I might listen more. Or people might listen more. Well, then we don't really understand protest, do we? Right? I mean, because if that's the case, then we would have already been listening. So what I always go back to Martin Luther King's speech, The Other America, that was given at Stanford, and talks about the riots that were happening, and what does he call them? Does anybody remember? Riots are? The voices of the voices of the unheard, right? Riots, the voices of the unheard, which is for me the reminder that people don't just protest out of nothing, right? Yes, there are some folks that love to go protest, and there isn't a protest that they've been to, and they haven't accepted. But for the most part, protests are sparked by deep injustice and finally having enough. Ultimately, people have had enough, and they don't know what else to do. And too many of us only see that about how it inconveniences our lives. Now, we're a family that supports protest, all that. And even I, sometimes I'm like, oh, if you wouldn't take over the bridge, it just made so many people. But then I catch myself, I'm like, yeah, man, you just took over the bridge. I mean, you are making a statement. And for me, and I consider myself kind of a palatable institutional person, I need those folks to remind me about why many of us stay in this work. Because those are my activist friends who are pushing me. They're like, okay, you're in the system. That's okay-ish. But let's keep reminding about what you are committing to and saying you are about, so that you don't get sucked into a reinforcing of institutions that continue to marginalize. So I need my activist people to remind me that there is more than just me. And so the kindness is understanding the complexities of why people protest, why people are on the street, why people get to the point that they do. And that's understanding that complexity. Yes, sometimes it's inconvenient. Yes, maybe there could be different ways to do it. But I think all of those combined, I think that they operate a spark, and then you need people in the system, and you need people to do longevity. I mean, there's all kinds of things. But I think if we didn't have folks who were pushing and protesting, then many of the things that you and I experience today, we wouldn't have. And so part of what I try to do and pass on to my kids is the idea that protest is actually a kindness to the world. To say that we are more complex than what we've been. And in many ways, if it comes from a religious perspective, right? God expects more of us than we have been. And so protest is a reminder of that. So it's a kindness for us towards those who are protesting, but if you are protesting, it is a kindness to institutions in the world to know that we are more than what we have been. So as we move into the world, thinking about kindness, protest is one of those places. Two more. Next slide. I told this story a little bit at the beginning, that part of civil disobedience, I really encourage, if you feel any inkling, calling to acts of civil disobedience, that you get on the mailing list for American Friends Service Committee. They are often organizing. Find out the people in your community and tell them that you are interested in training, and if there is ever an event or an action that's called, make sure you're going to be there. Make sure you have friends that will tell you when you need to be there. Because if you don't have those friends, then we're not connecting with the community in its fullest. I have 2 or 3 people that I will trust that will say to me, Bruce, you need to be here. And I don't ask what it is. And I'll say, that's okay. Debbie said, I need to be there. I will be there. And part of it's transformative for me every time I go through the training, because I can lean so much into more adversarial relationships, and that I am supposed to be victorious over you. I lean into political strategy where we just need to win at any cost, and I think that is actually destructive to us. And so when you begin to go through civil disobedience training, you begin to see that it is not about winning over, right? It's not about I'm conquering you. That's what the system would want to have over those of us who are standing up to it. But it's actually honoring the dignity and humanity of us all. And so that's a different kind of power that we bring into that space. So I would encourage you, if you ever have a chance, to do the training, even if you don't feel like you are in the place. And not everybody has the privilege to be arrested. So it is not that is a mark or anything, but I would encourage you that if you ever have a chance to at least take the training to do so. I'm going to let last comments, and then we'll just do a little bit of question. I think one of the things that has impacted us in our community over the last couple of years is our true understanding of what the body is and who the body is. As one who went through COVID during the time when it was just beginning that vaccinated people were being hospitalized, but then it is now the majority of people in the hospital are unvaccinated. The amount of vitriol directed at unvaccinated people was terrible, right? I'm sure all of us at some point said dehumanizing things about people who were choosing not to be vaccinated for whatever reason. Even if people were vaccinated because of pre-existing conditions and couldn't, we may or may not know that, but we would make judgments. I think it's one of the marks for many who were of the vaccinated sort and kind of in that ilk. I think one of the worst ways we've modeled being part of the body of Christ that I can remember. Because you would hear people say things, well, we should just put them all on an island and they'll all die off on their own, right? Oh, good, right? I mean, there's just all kinds of things that would happen that were being said by folks that I'm like, what are we doing? I mean, I remember being in the hospital and people trying to comfort me in some way that wanted to be mad at unvaccinated people for me getting COVID. I'm like, that's not the space that I'm in, but thank you, I guess, for trying to comfort me. But I think part of what we need to take seriously is that that's what a lot of the world has been doing. And I know we participated in that. But I actually think that as Christians talk about this book, and you all talk about kindness, that we are either all the body of Christ or we're not. When one part of the body suffers, we all suffer. When one part of the body rejoices, we all rejoice. And we don't get to choose whether that's true or not. And we don't get to be the one who are the purveyors of that designation of the body of Christ. So part of what I hope we do, what we move into the world with this idea of kindness, is that we understand we are all part of the body, and we have to treat each other as if we really believe that. Because I don't think we do that as much as we need to. So I would say that as you move into the world, as you're thinking about all these things, from the very personal to who you are, and how you're kind to yourself, to the checker, to the person on the drive, whatever it is, and to this larger kind of who is the body and how do we model love and kindness to people who disagree with us, not so that they will agree with us. Like, my love for unvaccinated people is not conditional or transactional. Right? I am not acknowledging people who make different choices as part of the body of Christ so that they will do this. I'm acknowledging that they're part of the body of Christ because they're the body of Christ. Period, almost, right? And so that, whatever comes of that, great. Whatever doesn't come of that, fine. But I can't cut them off to say that it's just this part. That's what the whole scripture is about, is that we can't just arbitrarily cut somebody off because we don't agree with who they are. So, as you move through the world on all those levels, I hope you do so choosing kindness. This is, again, one of my favorite pictures of people I've met who wouldn't be my friends necessarily, but they're my baristas, and we hang out, and we like each other, and we extend kindness to each other. Kyle, in the middle there, is one of my favorite people in the world. Kyle, every morning, says to every customer, "Have a beautiful day." And I wait for it. Like, people, you can see people get their coffee, he's like, "Have a beautiful day." Sometimes it's like, "Okay, have a beautiful day, all three of you," right? Because we're all waiting. But part of it is, like, we've developed these relationships, and you have to practice them. You have to choose. It's excruciating to do so every morning, to choose, do I have to be kind again today? Yes, is the answer. And to continue to do that over and over again. All right, so we don't have any more time. I'll take a little bit of questions for last moments, but I do want to, let me make sure I give you some, I'll send this information to Philip. You can connect with me on email and all the places. I'll do one, I'm the worst at this stuff. My publishers are always like, "Did you talk about the book?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, I guess." So thank you, Presbyterians, for purchasing the book. The audio version just came out. So if you're an audio book reader, so the story behind this, I don't read it. No, don't awe. Because I read it, I did 25 hours of recording, and they came back and said, "So we're going to use a professional." You know, I don't have to be good at it. I told you, I'm mediocre at a great many things. They want to sell the book. They know what's going to sell. Apparently it was not me. So I've listened to it, and David Shee is so much cooler than me. He does a great job. I actually am hoping to meet him, so that I'd love to hear how because it's different than other books he's narrated. But that just came out on Libro FM and Audible, if you want to pick up the audio version. So, all right, it is... I'll take a couple of questions, and then we need to end. So does anybody have any comments, questions they'd like to address real quick, and then we can go to dinner.
What if you feel so strongly about unvaccinated people?
Yes.
I mean, people in hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
We have people in our church who
Yep.
work and it's disrespectful to them, and they're filled up with it.
Yeah.
Okay, so how does that go along what you just
Yeah.
said with walking away?
Mm-hmm. So the question is when when there are people in hospitals who unvaccinated folks, it's just become so much. Like, how do you walk? So the walking away thing, healthcare workers can't walk away. I mean, in some ways they could, right? They could decide. I will say, say that again.
So suppose I'm talking to somebody,
Yeah.
and they say, I'm not going to get vaccinated.
So I've had those conversations with people, and I say things like, well, I really wish you would. Here's why. And if I have a relationship with that person, I have relatives that aren't, many of us probably have people in our lives, right, that aren't vaccinated. How have you talked with them, right? Or have you decided, I can't do that? I think there have been some times, and some will critique you for not trying to convince somebody to do something. I actually think you have to gauge whether that relationship can withstand that kind of interaction, because they all can't. And do you choose a relationship breaker in the short term, or do you hold on to the possibilities of a long-term relationship? So I would say, I say my piece and what I need to say, and then I move on. Because I actually think at this point, most folks are not going to be convinced. So what I can do is stay in relationship enough that if there's ever a shift, a break, they know exactly who to come to. Because I haven't been, you're a terrible person for not being vaccinated. I said, I disagree with you, I kind of get where you're coming from, or whatever you want to, however you want to do it, so that if the seed is planted, if there's ever a change, they know exactly. And I've said to people, if you need to do it in secret, I don't care. Right? I don't need you now to be the one on the news going, I've changed my mind. But if you ever need, and as I've written about my experience with COVID, I said, if you need to just do it and not tell anybody, do that. That's fine. You don't need to now be the person that goes out and converts everybody. Yes?
What's next for Bruce?
What's next for Bruce? Tonight or no? I'm going clubbing we always do every Friday night. No, I do have a new book that is going to come out in spring of 23 called Everything I Believe About God. And it is what I hope is the book that as people come into your communities and they just say, what's this faith thing? That's going to be the book that you hand them. I write a faith montage that is like a statement of faith that I'm really, really excited about. And it comes from, you will recognize it, it is justice focused, but Jesus focused, and I'm really excited. That's the next big project that I'm working on, and we'll finish that this summer. The manuscript is due September 1, so I'm hurriedly working on it. The statement is done. That's the big thing that is going. And then I'm working on a podcast still, BRC and Friends. I've added 3 new co-hosts. Some of you know them, Amy Kim Krimis Parks, Laura Heifetz, 2 co-hosts, Mickey Scott Bay Jones, and Jorge Bautista. Probably most of you don't know Jorge, but hysterical. So the 4 of us, or 5 of us, they are rotating with me as I co-host a podcast with different people on it. So that's the other thing. Keeping myself, that 20% of not church time, keeping myself busy. All right, it's 5 o'clock. You all are hungry. Thank you so much for having me. And this is...
Thank you, Bruce. Yes, everybody's hungry, but the food's not here yet. So, if there are more questions, we can still vamp, or if you need a break, we can do that.
Yeah, we probably need a break.
You're good. Okay, so Leslie, do you want to?
Yeah, I can. What a wonderful afternoon. Thank you all for being here. We are waiting. As soon as I'm done here, I will call and find out. They knew they were supposed to be here, but I know how things happen with food. But we do need a few minutes that we'll swap out, so if you want to stretch, take a break. When we come back, there will be 2 lines here, and it should be just grab and go. We'll have the drinks right here. We'll have some sodas and water. Of course, we've got coffee. If you're a vegetarian, we'll have one of our helpers, our kitchen folk, can get your meal for you. And so it's a barbecue meal from a local establishment that we're excited to support. But why don't I offer a prayer for our meal, so that when we do come back, we will be ready to rock and roll on that. So let's pray. Gracious, loving God, we are so grateful for this opportunity to join together as your people from across the state of Kentucky. And we are grateful to serve you, and thank you so much for Bruce and his words and his challenge to us and the love that he has for you and for his people. Bless this meal that we will share together. We are thankful for the time that we have in the fellowship. In Christ's holy name we pray. Amen.